Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing.
Chimera, mutant, redhead, empath. These are all things that my amazing guest, Trish Mo, and I are going to be talking about today. You guys, I've been, ever since I met Trish and had the privilege of being on her show and discovered that we just were like, oh my God, you too? This, that? I have been and I know I always say I'm excited to bring a guest on, but this one I really am. Like, I've been so excited about this conversation because there's just so many amazing intersections between being highly sensitive and empathic and so many other things. And Trish is somebody who has really, really been through a lot of these things. So Trisha was born outside of Roswell, New Mexico, and has a long history of supernatural experiences in her own life, which include multiple near-death experiences and mediumship from a very young age. She also has a lifelong history of abduction experiences as well. She has now incorporated those psychic medium gifts through assisting others in haunting investigations, historical archaeology, cold cases, and missing persons cases, and professional genealogy. She is currently the host of The Missing Piece with Trish Mo on United Public Radio and 105.3 FM New Orleans, and formerly a co-host on Chasing Prophecy. Trisha is a freelance artist and photographer currently residing in the land of Oz and heart of the United States, known as Kansas. She is the owner of Savage Roots Alchemy, Trisha Morris Photography, Lenore Vintage Beauty, Te Amo. Vintage Beauty Te Amo or Te Amo Trish Mo?
That's two different, yeah.
Okay, Te Amo Trish Mo. Yeah. She has a studio where her work can be viewed in Topeka, Kansas. Trish studied criminal justice with a minor in psychology at the University of Kansas in Colorado, at Colorado Technical University, to include a focus on serial killers her senior year. Trisha is a certified clinical hypnotherapist, currently working on obtaining her NLP programming certification as well. Oh my goodness. So do you prefer to go by Trisha or Trish?
Either.
Okay. I think of you as Trish because that's how I met you. So I'll call you Trish. Trish, I am so glad you're here. Welcome.
I am too. And thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this. We always have amazing interactions, and it's just, it really made me realize with people like you on my show, there's a whole other world of people out there that are, weird just like me.
Yeah. Well, and what I find is that, before you and I jumped on, we started having some conversations about the MTHFR gene mutation and some of the new discoveries I've made about these things called bug, like basically there's this thing called blue bug, stork bite, and then dimple above your butt. And I was like, so I was sharing with you and it's like, and you're like, oh my God, I have that too. And what I find is that conversations with other, I love this term that recently a friend of mine shared with me of calling us neurospicy, and I love talking with other people who sort of fit on the spectrum of neurospicy, where we start comparing notes and going, you too, you got this thing too. Like also you were talking about heterochromia, which is, or known as witch eyes. Mm-hmm. And it's just so amazing. So I love how these conversations, like, for one thing, I don't know about you, but for me, it's like, it helps me to realize I'm not alone, that I'm not the only one going through this because, you grow up around sort of the average muggles and they're all like, you just weird.
Yeah.
But before we go into like all of the why, like go down the rabbit hole, because I'm sure you and I will. I just love to start with kind of just who are you? Like, how did it all start for you as a highly sensitive, empathic person? And obviously, you grew up, you were born outside of Roswell. So like, that's just a whole thing to start with.
Yes.
And near-death experiences and mediumship from a very young age. So, as well as a long history of abduction. So I'm imagining that started happening for you as a little. But I'd love to hear, like, from you, like, what was childhood like? What was it like being sensitive? Did you know that you were different? Did you know that you were an empath? Did you know, like, tell me about your childhood.
Well, I grew up, I was born outside of Roswell, but then we moved to the southwestern corner. I was in the middle of the Gila wilderness for most of the younger part of my childhood. And so I was different. Before I was born, I chirped, like a bird from the time I was born. And my parents, they took me to the doctor, thought something was wrong with me. And they said, no, that's how she communicates. That's her crying. So I was literally speaking a different language when I was born. I was almost, I was a little over a year old when I learned how to cry from my sister, probably my older sister. And then, by the time I could talk, I would tell my parents very in-depth stories about myself in other lives, because it was nothing that, a 2-year-old would have seen and I told the same exact story consecutively, many times. And I remember it very clearly. And I would say, I was a man and I was in this sword fight and I, was laying there dying and all the, so my parents were probably like, oh, wow. So, but this was the 80s. People still didn't talk about things like that. I became terrified of the dark because I saw so many spirits and initially I wasn't afraid of them until probably, you get older, and because nobody else accepts them. I think that's when I started fearing ghosts and spirits and things like that, because I would say prior to 4, even when I would be running around in the woods and everything, and the elementals, and I 100% attribute my safety. It was like the entire forest was raising me, quite literally, because there are so many things. I remember running into like mountain lions and Gila monsters and all, and none of them ever, obviously, I was never harmed. But once I started getting older and I was telling my parents about all the ghosts in my room or spirits or what have you, I think that's when I started becoming afraid of such things, because of course they would tell me, no, that, those things don't exist. And
right. It's just your imagination, honey.
Yes.
There's nothing under the bed. Don't worry.
So I would lay there, and my room was at one end of the house and my parents was at the other. And it might as well have been like 10 miles for me, because the amount of entities from my room to theirs that were just magnet drawn towards me, was like full waiting rooms of spirits waiting to speak to me. And here my mom, parents, here's adults saying like, rightfully so, don't get me wrong, don't talk to strangers and don't, so as a kid, you become afraid of all those things. And so I think I blocked a lot of it out. Plus I did have so many experiences with abductions from a young age. And again, these were negative experiences. Not all of them. I don't want to say all of them, because I know there is other races that have saved my life throughout the years. But I was, in an area where government testing and things like that were very, everybody knows about it there. It's something, on the Arizona, New Mexico border, White Sands Missile Range, that was probably maybe only a few hundred miles away. And then, of course, Truth or Consequences, which I always think that name's funny. New Mexico is where they used to have the field of all those enormous satellite dishes, that you see on like movies and stuff. that was very close to us. And my dad would take me there, and we'd get to go see the satellite dishes and stuff. But so I think a lot of the negative experiences that probably blocked out a lot of my ability to embrace any of my gifts up until a few years ago was due to trauma in that sense,
I've also seen for so many people that the impact of being invalidated for picking up extra information really messes with our ability to trust, to trust our intuition, to acknowledge what's going on, because there's this cognitive dissonance and confusion that immediately gets activated anytime the paranormal information starts coming, because we are told from such, like, we're programmed from such an early age, this is not real. You're making shit up. You're just being overreactive. You're just being too sensitive right now. And, you're just a very imaginative little girl who can come up with these things. And so as a result, I think that it also creates this sense of, like, we start fearing our own, we start blaming ourselves and perceiving ourselves as broken or wrong. And I think in many, many times I see people fearing what they're receiving because the message is, this isn't real. Therefore, it's you who's being cuckoo here.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, because of my environment, because I lived on top of a mountain and was constantly outside and in the woods and everything, I remained very grounded because of that environment. I became more quiet, and I would read a lot and do things, outside all the time and with my animals and stuff. But as far as thinking I thought everyone was like that. I thought everyone could communicate with animals. I thought everyone talked to plants and trees and, dead people. I didn't know that I wasn't like everyone else. And another thing, back to the programming thing, even something as simple as I started taking piano lessons, and in art, I was in a ceramics class and then piano one summer, and I was very good at it. I was just a natural at it. But then my teacher said, again, one of those things, probably innocently and not thinking about the long-term results of saying that to a child, but these sayings specifically stood out in my mind. She said, "There's no way you can be that good. You've never had lessons. You've never had." So every time, I was like, okay, well, so my recitals, my mom was like, she would always get so upset because I would go up there and I would purposely make mistakes, and I would purposely slow myself down to act like a beginner, and I would purposely, and so that became a pattern. Because I didn't want to look any better or different than any of the other kids. I didn't think it was okay that we each had our own individual, strong points and skills and things like that. So in an effort to fit in, I completely downplayed any artistic or creative talent I had back then. And that was a fear of mine forever, actually, up until I was, it was during the shutdown that I finally started doing art and photography permanently, and because from that moment, like, that was the broken point where somebody told me as a kid that I couldn't do that, or that I shouldn't do that in that way. So, but yeah, once we moved to a city and I got older, I just hid it, forever, because it wasn't normal. And I became very religious, up until I got Lyme disease. And, I had numerous things happen in my life. I was struck by lightning. I was like 12 at summer camp. I was electrocuted in high school. I started having seizures and like mini strokes when I was probably 18 to 20, maybe. And then it wasn't until much, much later. It was 2018 that I got Lyme disease, diagnosed anyway.
Diagnosed. Yeah. That journey from getting Lyme disease to being diagnosed is usually a long one.
Well, that turned out to be, I think that's just the time I tested positive for having an active infection of it. I think I'd had it much longer. But all of that. And so I had a heart attack. All these things,
Which I learned. So Lyme in my family of gene mutated people, in my nuclear family of 3 generations, my parents, me and my siblings, and my nephews, there's 9 of us, or there was 9 of us. Now my dad is gone. But out of the 9 of us, basically, or wait a second, no, there's 12 of us. I'm sorry. I'm like, so yeah, my parents, there's like parents, 3 kids and 4 kids, 7. Oh, there is 9 of us, brain. So there's 9 of us who are biologically related. Out of the 9 who are biologically related, 7 of us have had either chronic or acute Lyme. And my joke is just the other 2 haven't gotten diagnosed with it. But it's so fascinating how some of us are more vulnerable to getting it, for sure.
Well, and MS has the exact same symptoms of Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And there's no test there's different for the symptoms and stuff and things of MS, but there's no specific test for MS, which was always, I'm like, okay, but that makes sense to people, but
right. But no, God forbid, you call it Lyme.
Right.
So what I just remembered what I was going to say was, so my mom basically finally got diagnosed with, and when she collapsed from Babesia and ended up in the hospital, my mom tested for all the things. And so we started taking her to a Lyme literate doctor. And one of the things that the Lyme literate doctor said that I did not know until then was that strokes and heart attacks are common side effects of Lyme disease. Yeah. Because untreated Lyme causes so much inflammation and so much damage to the entire body that many people will have a heart attack or a stroke. And I actually have an uncle who, the way he went from being robust and healthy to having, and he spent a great deal of time out in the woods in New England. He went from being robust and healthy to having a heart attack. And then within very shortly after, rapidly progressing dementia, and then died, fairly soon. And my sense has always been that, I can never confirm this or prove it, but I'm kind of like, I would not be at all surprised if it was Lyme disease that ultimately took him out, because he was fairly, he was in his 70s when he died. And and was just, like I said, just really sturdy. This guy was he was he was just like one of the giants in mythology. He was like this spectacular, sturdy, huge person. So not like me.
Well, and I've thought about with a lot of my family members too, that, I've had uncles and such that died fairly young, in their 50s or 60s. And again, all of us are the same way. All of us live in places, Alaska, Colorado, New Mexico, all the mountainous areas. And they died of heart attacks. And I'm like, what, the only reason I did not die that time from a heart attack, I was in my living room, which is funny because I had just gotten a tattoo that says free. And it was actually based on a Psalms scripture. And literally that day I came home, sat on my couch, and I'm like, oh man, my heart doesn't, and all of a sudden I see this giant, I had almost 20-foot high ceilings. So I see this giant, very, very bright winged being. I can't really explain it, in my living room. And then all of a sudden I had a heart attack. And when I woke up, I was like, well, did that cause the heart attack or was it saving me? But I assume now it was saving me because I was by myself, nobody would have known that had happened. And that's really where, after that point, was when I became more awakened as far as spiritually and everything else. There's a certain, I don't know, there's a certain wisdom of life. Of one's own life, I guess, that comes with death, or from
Mhm.
touching death, I should
Mhm.
say.
Mhm.
That can't be, I can't explain it. But my entire everything changed. It was literally like I was reborn at that point. And, I quit going to my church because none of them believed me after that. I started seeing literal battles of all kinds, like mythological creatures in the sky and the clouds, of angels and demons, and in the shapes of clouds. And I even have pictures of so many of them that you cannot deny what it looks like, but everybody kept telling me, no, you're whatever, you're crazy, and that was about the point when I started separating. It was about 37 ish, I guess, that I started, all of my friends, all family, work, I just didn't resonate with any of it anymore. Of course, especially when you're sick, most people tend to fall away anyways, because they just don't know how to deal with it. And nobody likes, being in that awkward position. Like, what do you say to someone? I was given like 1% chance to live because the Lyme had spread I had cardiac Lyme and neuro Lyme.
Oh.
So it had spread to my brain. It had spread to my heart. I had my brain was covered in white lesions, and they said, we don't know there's no cure. They said, you either make it or you don't. There's not much we can do for you, Trish. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to I'm going to stop going. I had like 6 specialists at the time. I was, I was on different drugs that caused other problems. And I stopped. I just stopped. I was like, no, no, no. I'm like, I am 37 years old, almost 38 at the time. I might have turned 38 somewhere in there, but it's one of those pivotal moments in my life that I thought, why all my life I've let everyone else tell me who I am and what I'm becoming and what I'm doing in this life. And that's not me. That's not me. If I'm going to die anyways, and I only have 6 months left to live, why am I going to spend that time seeing doctors and hooked up to monitors and in hospitals and on drugs and stuff? I felt that, especially with Lyme, you get the herxing reaction to drugs. So I'm like,
brutal.
yeah. So I'm like, I might as well, I'd rather not take anything and die in peace. So I stopped seeing any of them altogether. I don't recommend that. People don't do that. Like, you should always consult with your doctor, I'm sure. But for my purpose then, I wanted to do what I enjoyed, which meant spending time with my kids. And I started creating art again. I started painting again. I started writing again. I'm an excellent writer, but I quit all of those things for so long. And I completely changed my diet. I went back. I got my personal training certification. So I mostly by default, because I was learning more about my, the human body and such. And it was like 6 months later, I felt great. Between a mental, physical, I started walking and exercising again every day and changed what I ate. And they're like, we don't know what you're doing. I did go back and I had a brain scan, and they said, you've healed the white lesions in your brain. And then, things happened and again in my life that some very bad things that I ended up having to move right away. And we lost everything in our house. And I was thinking, these things, it didn't make me consider this point of my life until you just mentioned that these things, I always think that things happen absolutely for you and not to you, because it was just yesterday I was reading about, because I had to move, I ended up becoming a table games dealer at a casino, which is a really difficult job for an empath. But I was reading about Alzheimer's, and it said people who play card games, because of the mental calculation, if they do it young enough, and somebody who is, if their brain was damaged due to whatever, and they're at the early onset of Alzheimer's, because people can get Alzheimer's at my age, 41.
Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
But they said if you catch it in time and do something every single day, like playing cards, it almost reverses the effects and you don't go into that early onset of Alzheimer's. So here I was dealing, 100 hands an hour. That's all that mental calculation stuff until the shutdown actually probably saved my, I probably would have gone into complete dementia and Alzheimer's by now had I not done that, so.
Although I also, I've had this conversation. There's an interview back in the first season with my friend Carrie Mitchell, who basically she refers to the lost, the 10 lost years. Like and what I've noticed for so many of us is that I absolutely agree with you, like work with your doctor, find a team of healthcare practitioners and professionals who feel right to you. Don't just say like, screw it, I'm going to go off and do my own thing. But what I have seen again and again for so many of us is there is a point of deciding that we're going to take it into our own hands and we're going to fight for our own life. And we're going to be the one who says, I'm in charge of whether I live or die and not on my watch. I'm not going to let myself go. And I've seen this be like, there's a way in which that decision of like, no, my terms, my boundaries, instead of giving our power away to a doctor or to a diagnosis or to anything else, it seems to me that is definitely one of the things that makes a difference is that I am not going to, I'm going to be proactive in my recovery. I'm going to be invested in my recovery. I'm going to be involved in my recovery. So I'm imagining that playing cards absolutely has done amazing things for rebooting your brain. I'm also wondering if the decision that you made, that you were like, you know what, I'm not going to spend the last 6 months of my life just like on a pick line, being absolutely beside myself with herxing.
No.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. People with Lyme are there's so many across the world that are bedridden and think that that's the only way. And the thing is, even now, if I get if I happen to get sick or come down with something or whatever, and my immune system attacks itself, sure, it's easy to lay in bed and feel sorry for yourself and stuff. But that, it's one of those things like if you have a cold and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go take a shower. But then once you do, you feel so much better afterwards. Well, and it's the same with Lyme. You have
That's
to
not
continue.
Just with a cold.
Well, no, it's with
when you have a cold, Trish.
But I'm saying when people are sick. So with Lyme, when I'd be sick and thinking my muscles are all in play and my joints and everything, the best thing you can do is to move them. To move them. Yeah. Or walk or whatever to move that lactic acid because And then I would metaphorically be laying there and thinking, I'm like, oh God, this is like a cesspool of negativity. There's no flow, and you get stuck in that. It's literally like being stuck in the mud of your life because you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything about it. So I think don't get me wrong. I think doctors are great. I think modern medicine,
it's a miraculous thing. It is.
Yeah. But I think, and we're talking about even supplements and stuff can lead to other problems and vaccines and antibiotics and everything else causes a different reaction. So also with those and with doctors, I'm like, man, all of my doctors were kind of narcissists. And if I had believed all of these people telling me I was going to die, then I would have. If I would believe that it's with anything, and that's really where I started when I started researching my own bloodlines and my own body for them. And I had no idea I was a chimera until even though that had been discovered years ago, like in early 2000. But they didn't have that much research on it then. So then between that and researching my own genealogy and realizing that my own family, my own bloodlines, literally, because I have 2 different DNAs, had been at war with each other, quite literally, since the beginning of time. I mean, all the way back through the Vikings, and they fought each other in the Civil War and with the native background and everything. And I'm like, it's like my body, like this, planet of Trisha here has to learn to get along with each other. So my immune system doesn't attack itself every day to live, to live on the same planet.
So you heard my telepathic prompt because I was like, let's talk about chimeras. I literally just sent that to you. And then you just said chimera. So for people who have never heard this term, let's get the definition out. What is a chimera?
Oh gosh, I know the clinical definition, or
I don't know. The definition that makes sense to actual people. Like,
a chimera, that goes all the way back in mythology to even Egyptian times. They have the Great Sphinx, and they have, gosh, in Greek and Roman, they have
like
so
the
many
Minotaur, Pan, centaurs.
But the actual, because I looked this up once, the actual scientific term, as far as biology goes, is a single organism composed of cells with more than one distinct genotype. So in animals, this means an individual derived from two or more zygotes, which can include possessing blood cells of different blood types. So that can also be like, if the zygotes were of different sexes, then that's how people can end up having both female and male sex organs. And
they can be, intersex.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of these things, I think there's tons of people out there that are chimeras that have no idea. In the last, 20, 30 years, I would say, all of these people who, and kids that are telling their parents, it's like pronouns and stuff. They don't think they necessarily identify as what the gender they were born with or whatever. Well, if you think about it in this scientific fashion, again, that's kind of a defense mechanism in my own life, that I always find something to back up anything, even though I know. But for all of the
well, and I think that this is another casualty of being invalidated your entire childhood,
right?
And growing up around the prove it, that's just not real. You're just making this stuff up. That we get used to being able to back ourselves up, and we get used to being able to, present, like that validating evidence that's going to back up the what we know with something that's accessible to people. So I'm right there with you in terms of like having the science to back up the knowing, I think actually can often be very helpful. So
yeah, especially, when you're trying to explain to people who might not, might have different viewpoints or not understand how somebody can, be in one body and have different, because even by explaining these things to my psychiatrist and things like that, I absolutely don't have like a multiple personality or dissociative disorder. What I realized was happening after the last time I died, it's like they think I might have been a triplet, actually, because I have 3 of some organs. So it's like those, and now science has proven that personality and everything else can absolutely be transferred with even like an organ, in organ transplants and stuff. So if I have the organs of my twin and triplet, it's like they took over for a minute there. So anytime I was the one that was like, no, and it was absolutely not a higher consciousness. It was a distinct, different being, which again, that would rewrite history and people's knowledge, at what point is the soul incarnated?
Yes.
It would change everything.
Well, and even the whole concept of walk-ins and people who say, that they like go from one place to another. Interestingly, Carrie, who is the person who I was mentioning earlier with Lyme disease, redheaded, assimilated twin, lost a twin. And you and I talked about this too, that I'm also an assimilated twin, but it's just kind of like, how amazing, like this sort of weird, like empath, gene mutation, Lyme disease, assimilated twin, all of these things, the way that they tend to merge together. I'm realizing, just for the sake of the audience, that one thing you and I are talking about, as if everybody would know what this is, is herxing. And so I was just thinking, like, for those of you who have not had the privilege of dealing with chronic Lyme, like Trish and I have, there is this thing called herxing, or it's known as the Herxenheimer reaction. And essentially my short version of it is that when you start treating the disease, the die-off from the stuff that is being addressed makes you feel substantially sicker than if you just leave it alone. How's that for an answer? Does that fit with your experience, or do you have anything to add about what herxing is?
But I think that absolutely also explains life in general, because when you start going through these different spiritual awakenings, or you start reflecting upon your life, I consider that, even though physically, because there's like mental and emotional and spiritual herxing too, now that I think about it, now that you just mentioned that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, because when you go back and you look at situations in your life and from childhood and everything, or you learn different perspectives, as you get older, it hurt. Like, man, I have had some breakdowns when I thought about, was shown a different a scenario from childhood that all this time I was hurt over, or I was angry about, or whatever. And I saw it from a different perspective, like my parents or whoever, my friends, or where I was at. And that's painful. Like, to think that I was holding resentment for something all my life. And then when you release that and you forgive yourself, to me, that's the same as herxing, but spiritually.
That's so awesome. Well, and you just reminded me of when I was in seminary. There was, in some ways, one of the most like devastating classes that a lot of the very, very convicted, in the sense of like very strong in their convictions, like evangelicals and very more conservative Christians, when they took these classes on not just like Bible studies where you're just going through it, but like history, like the history of Christianity and the history of Bible study, and like information where things were starting, like where it's not just like you're reading King James Bible and accepting it as the word of God, but where people were really starting to like extract things and learn things about it. It was really fascinating seeing how hard it was for the people who had been raised in a culture where the, King James version is the literal word of God.
Yeah.
To suddenly have these people like basically poking holes through everything that they'd been learning. And for those of us who had been raised in a much more sort of like inquisitive world, because I was raised as a Unitarian Universalist. So, I mean, the joke about the UU is, instead of a cross burning in the middle of their lawn, they burn a question mark. So I was used to inquiry, but it was so amazing to see like how incredibly hard it was for these seminarians who thought they knew things and thought that they had the market, like that they were sure about it. And in hindsight, as you're talking about this, I really do think that they kind of went through these spiritual herxes where things were starting to, like, the solid foundation was shaken underneath them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's, one thing I always heard, it's interesting you put it like that, because I always heard from Spirit years ago is no leaks and stop the leaks. And I'm like, what does that mean? And I would go around, I'm like a little kid. I mean, that comes with autism too, but I'm like, is it something in my environment? Is there going to be a flood? Is there going to be, but essentially with anything, with any metaphor, it's like if you poke a bunch of holes in a boat, eventually it's going to sink. If you have a bunch of little fires, those eventually add up to a big fire. But then, of course, with my life, as above, so below, things actually happen in that manner. So as in, it'll be something very personal to my own life, some lesson, but then it'll also be something in my kind of general vicinity, like it could be just in my town or even just the Midwest, and then something on a bigger world scale. So a few months ago when I got sick again, it was in April, actually, the first time. And I was doing the photography for this festival, and we were surrounded by all these trees, and they had cleared out, the middle and stuff. And there were all these people had started all these little fires, because they were camping there. Well, all of a sudden, the entire forest is engulfed in flames.
Oh, my goodness.
I kept telling people and nobody was listening to me. It was a 420 festival. They might have all been high. I don't know. I was probably like the only one.
Yeah.
I was probably the only one, I'm there as the photographer. And I'm like, that looks like a forest fire. And everybody's like, no, it's campfires, it's bonfires. Well, I was taking pictures and I kind of got up on this hill. And I had turned around with my camera and I took a picture of the entire forest on fire. And I'm like, well, everybody's just watching the world burn here. And that is, again, a metaphor. The entire world, like our world, because we're down in this cleared area, but are oblivious. Everyone's oblivious to the entire world just burning down around them. And
no, it's not happening. No attention to the man behind the curtain.
Exactly.
I don't know if you saw the Netflix movie Don't Look Up. It's it's brutal. It's brutal.
No.
It's about it's about an asteroid that is about to hit the planet and about all of the different systems that are deeply invested in denying what is happening. And it's really scathing indictment of modern culture and our capacity to ignore everything that's going on.
It's astonishing. And the funny thing about that was that when I got there, I parked at the gate and I told the security guard, I'm like, can I park here? Because I feel like, it was a full moon. It was the pink moon. I said, and I backed in and he's watching me like I'm a crazy person. I get out, like I'm putting like salt and oil around my vehicle. He's like, which helps me because I was like, I gotta go.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as before everyone started panicking and running and the fire trucks got there, I had already left because I was like, I can't deal with chaos.
I'm out of here. Yeah.
So... And I told him that, and he was looking, and he told another guard, he's like, that's probably a bad sign. And it's funny, you said, don't look up, because I was looking up at the moon, and, and he's like, it's probably a bad sign when you see a witch just staring at the moon and start like putting some protective something or other all around her vehicle. I was like, yeah, be careful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what else do you tell? Because nobody believes you. Like, you can only...
right.
You do, so
yeah, you do what you can do.
I that was a big metaphor in my life because I was seeing it through a different lens than everyone else,
Yes.
And,
yes. Well, and I really, one of the things that I've been really getting at a deeper level is that all of, sort of within the kind of, again, the category or the term that I've been using lately of being neurospicy, whether it is empath, highly sensitive person, intuitive, medium, psychic, somebody with sensory processing disorder, autistic, all of these things are a capacity to perceive the world in a way that the average muggle does not. It's like this ability to see and receive more information than the regular person does. And, I got sort of channeled a saying a number of years ago, like my guides came through and were like, they showed me this thing. They're like, your world is living by colorblind standards right now. Most people do not see the full spectrum, but instead of those of you who can see a broader spectrum, being validated and acknowledged for what you can see, you're dealing with people who are like really invested in their colorblind standards. And so I started living with, don't judge your empathic rainbow or your neurospicy rainbow by colorblind standards. But we live in a culture that is living by colorblind standards. And I mean, part of my work, and I believe part of your work, is we're the ones who are saying, there are a lot more colors here. There's a lot more stuff going on here than meets the human eye. And for me, it's like, I am drawing a line in the sand and saying, no, this is real. These experiences are happening. And if we're going to turn the planet around, y'all need to listen to us and stop denying what is true.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's, especially, now that, gosh, I still have trouble with that because speak as this, was once called the psychiatric capital of the world. And as a medium and all of
Topeka
these
has been called the
yeah, because they used to do Managers was originally here. Well, it's still here. It's abandoned now. They moved it to Texas. But oh my goodness. And the different, like there's Glore Sanitarium. There's a bunch of different ones and there used to be some of what were considered the most advanced medical doctors and scientists and everything else here. But now that I'm learning, when I can barely go to those places because all the spirits there, they did, because they were different, because those people were different. If you talked about anything like that back then in the 50s, 60s, 40s, even probably before, they'd put you in a mental institution, and they did such terrible
things.
Oh my gosh, it is so hard because I think of all the brilliant, amazing, gifted souls. I mean, even if either way, it's terrible. But I'm saying, we just killed them. We just killed them. Like and people forgot about them. Just shut the door. Like just left them there and turned a blind eye.
Yeah.
And I'm very close to that because as somebody who has been experimented on numerous times for different reasons, or used, for my psychic abilities or whatever, especially, like the government stuff. It's one thing, especially with abductions and such, and people always ask about that. I'm like, well, it's one thing. It's almost like we're more forgiving when it's a different race of beings that's doing something to us, because that's no different than us. Frogs probably assume that we're the aliens coming to abduct them when we, dissect them in biology class. But that's one thing, because it's like they don't know any better. But for other humans to knowingly do those things is very hard to get over. And
it's really hard to reconcile. Like I think and I think as empaths, I really believe that we understand ourselves as cells in the body of the earth in a way that the average person who's been so compartmentalized and so cut off from their sensitivity, cut off from their awareness of all things, that they don't necessarily feel that interconnection, and they don't necessarily understand that, like, if you do this to that person, you're doing it to yourself. Like, as above, so below, as within, so without, like that we are you, I am you, and you are me. Like now I'm hearing the Beatles song in my head, I am the walrus, but that, it just, for us, I think it brings up such a deep sense of like, why, like, how can you possibly do that? Like, it hurts when you do that. It hurts me when I do those things to other people. How can I no, this cannot continue to go on.
I think, and that's where I've actually completely transformed over this year. I swear, everybody keeps, I'm like, everybody I've interviewed on my show this year has been such a piece when you're talking about, when we talk to other people that have these things in common. And when I named my show The Missing Piece, I didn't know. I guess it's one of those things, like, you just, some things are called different things in different areas, whatever. But I didn't even put two and two together that, like, the puzzle piece and the handprint was the autism, because I was just recently diagnosed as being autistic in the last few years. So that's something that was newer also. And I was I'm like, well, I'm not defined by that. Like, everybody's very unique and very, we always define ourselves. If I wanted to define myself by all my illnesses and whatever, I would have so many. I'd be like a domestic violence survivor and, like a single mom, whatever, all these things. But it's not what has happened to you or what you're classified as in society or any of that. I don't think, I think it's what you do with it, like, none of those things are going to define me. So, right. But I think by having an invisible immune suppressant disease and abductions being, nobody believes in that, and talking to dead people, and nobody believes in that. And that even mirrored my years with a very abusive partner who everyone thought was the greatest person in the world on the outside. So all of these things in my life, like, have been, something that's living with, or even living with, a twin and a triplet inside me. Like in Navajo beliefs, if you kill one of your family members, then you become one of the evil ones, one of the walkers, and that's, I guess by definition, I technically would have done that before birth, by survival, not what. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I even struggled with that for years and being haunted. Like my other siblings within me quite literally haunted me for years. I mean, it's just recently that we came to a point of them forgiving me and seeing the bigger picture and me forgiving them. You know what I mean? Like an inner.
Yeah. You came to reconciliation.
Right.
Well, and it's interesting because in my case, I got a very, very the story that I tell myself, or that I know, is that in my case, I believe I would have had a fraternal, like I would have had a fraternal twin. I would have had a brother. And I really believe that it was a deliberate choice on the soul of the other person, that they were like, this is not, like, peace out. Thanks for the fish. I'm not going to stick around. And for me, it was this, I was looking for him everywhere. Everywhere for the first 30 years of my life. I was like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? So I had this incredible sense of despondent abandonment that I experienced as a result of that. And so I think, in some cases it may be the survival of the fittest, or, the stronger twin that assimilates. Other times I think it is that the soul of the twin or the twins or the other siblings just are like, yeah, not going to do this. Don't want, this ain't for me. You're going to get, here, you get to deal with all of it.
Well, and that's what, and I had a break. I mean, this was just like a few months ago, actually, that they said, no, listen, you are the one with that perspective. You are you're the one that's blaming yourself for killing your twin or whatever before. No, they're like, no, we gave you our lives because we knew that you needed them to be stronger. If I didn't have 3 spleens, I wouldn't have survived all these diseases I've had. I wouldn't still be here.
Well, and being an assimilated twin, sometimes I also feel like it prepares us or gives us everything we need. Like we have superpowers to be able to complete our mission and to do the things that we are here to do, that we're we might look like one being, but we have sort of more stuff going on than the average person does. And it allows us to do certain things too.
And I think when you go back, we always try to heal the symptoms of things with supplements or medicines or vaccines or whatever. And that's when I really changed my mindset on that. I'm like, okay, there's a reason I'm like this. And I think about plants, and I love plants, but I used to be terrible at growing them because I would either overwater them, underwater them, something, they'd get rerot. And I'm like, that's it. That's it. With the human body, you have to have balance. So if your soil is too acidic or alkaline, or you get too much water or not enough water, and that could metaphorically resemble a tension or whatever. Anything in excess is bad, and really but there's also different plants that are equipped for that. So around that time is when my daughter started painting cactuses, and I'm like, a cactus can go a long time without water because they store it differently. And I was like, maybe in our family lines, with inflammation and stuff and how the moon affects people with the water and everything. So when I started looking at things like that, I'm like, okay, so myself, these bloodlines finally came together since we had been fighting and trying to kill each other since the beginning of time, right? It's like cats and dogs, but they came together in one body. So it would be equivalent to planting something and its roots being intertwined with something else that is maybe toxic, but they have to evolve in that way in order to grow. So I'm like, you have to start the root of problems. You have to start at the root of, you have to go back through your genealogy. There's things in that alone that I'm like, oh my goodness, nobody ever talked about great, great, great uncle so-and-so that whoever's like daughter was probably his wife. Like there's weird stuff in history. I mean, not just my family, like this is anybody's I do.
Anybody's. Well, and it's so fascinating how much information, how much information is lost. I'm not actively doing genealogy, but it's like my ancestors are kind of like, they're revealing themselves to me and they're kind of dropping in. And I'm learning things about like ancestors were like, I had a great grandfather who was really, he was like a governor of in more than one state, like governor of Montana and governor of like, I think I can never remember, it was Kentucky or Tennessee, but like, I had no idea. Nobody in the family seemed to have known this. And it's so fascinating, the kinds of stuff that you start discovering. And I mean, that's not even health related, but where we start discovering it. Trish, I could have this conversation and I'm sure like there are so many things that I would just love to keep talking about. Like, I mean, we could do an entire episode on autism and the autism empath intersection. And, and also like what it means to be female and identify and diagnosed, quote unquote, as autistic, because it shows up as such a completely different thing than what people imagine when they see this sort of stereotypical male on the autism spectrum.
Yes.
But we are coming towards the top of the hour and I want to be sure I've got 3 questions for you. So the first question that I've got for you is, what do you really want to be sure you say in this interview? Like or in this conversation, what is the most important thing that you want to be absolutely sure is heard in this session?
Well, I think, we always get told, and that's where I was going with that. You have to get to the root of problems. You have to, so that when people say, I've changed my focus, necessarily change the past. We can't change what we've already done. We're adults, but we can change the future in children.
Yes.
In children, that's the roots. That's the seeds for our future generations that are going to live on through us, because generational trauma and even injuries and everything we know now follows them. So investing in our children, not teaching them how to just supplement healing by symptoms, but how to actually treat it at the roots, how to teach emotional and mental, how to connect, that those are just as important as physical health in school and in learning and everything else. And that's where my new focus is going to with my businesses and everything else, because especially where I live, there's so much crime and so much, and you see it in the schools and you see how it affects all the way down to the kids. So, we're so worried about investing in our own futures or leaving a legacy for our kids or having enough money or retirement or whatever for them. That doesn't matter if you don't invest in them from the beginning,
right
from the beginning.
Right. Well, and instead of leaving them money, I mean, it's like in many ways, it's like healing the ancestral rifts and healing the ancestral feuds that run in, I'm sure, like you could, because I think the other thing is, as you were talking about, having these 2 lines, I'm imagining that there were a lot of arranged marriages that happened as a result of peace treaties and the attempt to take warring communities and kind of bring them together. I mean, even kind of looking at Romeo and Juliet, and sort of like this idea of you're introducing these warring factions and you're bringing them together through marriage or intimacy and sex. And suddenly it's like, you're recreating the pattern. But what's so fascinating is you're speaking about it is like having these warring bloodlines within your own system where the peace has not yet been met or yet made. So stop worrying about, yes, money's great. Having some kind of legacy is lovely, but like, I love the message of like, focus on your children as the legacy, not on, not on the thing.
Yeah. There's that saying, and I keep seeing it everywhere. sometimes it's not who you are, what you do in this life. It's who you raise, and that doesn't even have to do, even if you don't have children,
Right.
even if that doesn't matter. It's what are you leaving behind? And that's one thing with studying genealogy. People are so afraid. I go through, not just my family, but other people's families as well. You go generation after generation of nobody really doing anything with their lives.
Yes.
Out of fear, everybody just did what they're expecting. And then you hear all of them at the end of their life say, wow, if I would have had the guts to, or if I would have, just stepped out of what I would have been something other than a farmer or whatever was expected of them, or just getting married and having kids or whatever it was. And they would have gone and explored the world and maybe, found some of those missing pieces, quite literally. So,
yeah. So my second question for you is, and I've been doing this with everybody, I love to think of this podcast as something that exists outside of time. And certainly we know that this is being recorded right now, and it is going to exist for years after it's done. And it's broadcasting. It's like sending a signal forward into the future. But I also believe that the digital signature is sort of like, it's like a ribbon, or a sash that goes across time, a piece of fabric that goes across time. And it not only goes forward, but it can go into the back as well. And I sort of have this image of like, there's these moments that we are touching in the past as well as the future, and that the fabric is just folding over on itself. And you and I are at a place where we can access the younger, struggling, possibly terrified Trish, and we are back in time. And so what I love to do is imagine that we are not just transmitting, but really like back there with her and telling her exactly what she needs to know in order to become and do what it is that she needs to do. So if you can imagine, or maybe you were doing this, that you are there with young Trish, maybe you put your hands on her shoulders, or you look her in the eye, whatever feels like the right way to connect with her. What do you tell her? What does she need to hear from you?
I think I would say sing like a bird. It's always the ones that like I was born that way. And then my voice was changed by what was expected of me. So.
Yeah, I'm just really hearing keep singing. Keep singing.
And that's something that people are afraid to do. But again, it's like the man behind the curtain. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
You either make it or you don't, just like my doctor said. But that's not up to anyone but you.
Well, and yeah, you make it or you don't. But then also, bottom line, we're all going to die. Like we have a very limited period. These bodies are so temporary.
Well, and
why not go for it?
It's never too late to begin again. It's never too late to start over. And I've done it. I failed hundreds of times in my life at and I've tried tons of things.
Yeah.
But that's the only way you live.
Yeah.
I don't want to live with regrets.
Yeah. And
that's why I learned mostly with communicating with the dead. We're always regretting when someone dies because we might not have told them what we wanted to say before they died, or vice versa. The dead communicate with me to say something to the living. But if we lived in the present all the time, then that wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. The dead wouldn't be haunting me to give you a message, and you wouldn't be finding me to give them a message. So like,
right.
Just presence, the precious presence. Presence equals presence. It's almost Christmas season too. It's funny.
It is almost Christmas season right now, although by the time this is recorded, it's post-Christmas. This airs as post-Christmas season. But yeah, Trish, this conversation has been, as always, just beyond delicious, so rich. So I really love how I feel like you and I like get together and we dump a 5,000 piece puzzle onto the table and we go, oh my God, and put things together.
Yes.
And I love making puzzles with you. I just love making puzzles with you. So last question, which will be in the show notes, you guys, so you don't have to like remember everything, but how do people get in touch with you?
Oh man. 6 months, I'll probably change. So I'm combining everything into one general landing page, where you can reach all of my projects. And, I've started writing science journals and finally a book, and putting all of those together. Because all these years, I have all these different certifications and degrees. And I always think that I'm not good enough, that I still need something else or to learn something else, where I don't know who to go to ask. But as you just said, I have tons of people that I have around me and, just networked with this year even, that support me, and regardless of anyone else that has abandoned me in life or anything else that's happened, that I've learned from, that are excellent mentors, and such great wisdom, that comes from people like yourself, that Spirit's been telling me, like, you have everything you need. Just if you build it, they will come. Type thing. So that's my main website is just trishmo.com.
Perfect. And you guys, it will be in the show notes. And then also, if you want to really hear like Trish talking the true, her radio show on United Public Radio Network, The Missing Piece, and that is PEACE. It's kind of a play on words there, guys. It's also on 105.3 FM New Orleans. That it's a really wonderful talk radio. It's really, and Trish you never know what amazing things she's going to be talking about, because it is a very organic, very, just sort of follow the threads and see what comes up and discover, just explore things. So I highly recommend checking out Trish's show as well, because it is just delicious. And there are a couple, if you go back in the Wayback Machine in the archive, you can find a couple conversations that Trish and I had a while back now. Yeah. Trish, thank you so much for joining me today and for being here. This has been so rich.
Yes, it's always a pleasure, Jen. I love talking to you. And real quick, one thing about The Missing Piece, it's funny. I started it in January, so I've almost been on my own with that a year now. I started with around 100,000 listeners that I brought, probably from Chasing Prophecy, and I am up to almost 2 million live listeners. But the thing, like you said, and we talk about fear and stuff. See, people don't follow or subscribe or anything, which is fine. That's not what it's about for me. It's if I reach a person, so I don't care about that. Like, I know they're watching and listening, but they don't want to know they're associated like a crazy person. No, there's topics. I say what's on my mind. So I guess I'm not afraid of the man behind the curtain anymore.
No, he's just a dude from Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a balloon, and who kind of got lost somewhere. But
yeah.
And you guys, I will second that, in terms of, like, a lot of people will listen but not necessarily subscribe or even leave a review or a rating. But, go over to Apple Podcasts and give Trish a rating, because it really does make a huge, and while you're at it, come over to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating here in the Empathic Mastery Show. Because this is, like, you guys help us to get the word out into the world, and that makes a huge difference. Everything will be in the show notes, guys. And go check out Trish. Go check out her show. It's really awesome. Trish, again, thank you so much for being here. This has just been delicious.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.